So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to my new video feature, Zooms with a View. And my very first guest is my good buddy and partner, a worldwide famous, internationally known New York Times bestselling, award-winning author of about a gazillion books. And he's just a dude. That's what he is.
I am a dude, and I'm happy to be here in this inaugural Zoom thing. What fun for me! And of
Yeah,
course, Mike and I have known each other for decades, so it's always fun to talk to him, and you guys can
yeah.
overhear the conversation for whatever it's worth.
I thought it would probably be a good idea to tell everyone how we first met, which was one of the great embarrassments of my life. Um, we went to this children's literature conference in Warrensburg, Missouri, at the University of Central Missouri, and they put all the authors up in this campus conference center, which was a converted dormitory. And the dormitories had bedrooms with shared bathrooms. And of course, I got billeted in a bedroom and shared a bathroom with Roland and his lovely wife, Marie. So it was just like in college. You would go in, you'd lock the door, you'd go to the bathroom, you'd go out back to your room, lock your door, all good. Except I kept locking them out of the bathroom because I'm an idiot. What can I say? And poor Marie would like tiptoe down the hallway and knock very quietly on my door, and I'd open the door and she'd say, "Would you mind unlocking the?" And I'd be like, my face would fall, and I'd be like, "These people are never going to ever speak to me again after this," but they did, and here we are, 20 years later. Who can figure?
Much to our regret, we are still talking to you, and it's funny because you mentioned in those same dorm rooms, I did it to another author named Anderson. What was his first name?
Anderson?
He's a story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I not walked him in the same building years before that, and he has never forgiven me for that. And so I know how that goes because I in college I never stayed in a dorm, so I had no idea how
Right.
those little
Right. Yeah.
Jack and Jill bathrooms work and stuff like that. So it wasn't unusual, and I didn't really care
Yeah. It
because
was.
I'm a guy. Marie was more concerned about it because she likes to like dress nicely before she goes, and she has to overdress because I always underdress, and so she always kind of tries to make
Right.
me
Right.
look better. I mean, I just show up and go,
Sure.
hello, yeah. So
So
yeah, that is how we met.
it is how we met, and it's been a great friendship for me, at least, ever since. And
Yeah, not me so much, but no, it's been a great friendship for
I
me
get
too,
it. I
Mike.
get it. He
Oh.
tags along. He's annoying. Um, I wanted to talk about books first. And last night I was thinking about this, and I thought about I wanted to ask you about Switch. Switch is your novel that takes place in a sort of post-apocalyptic Portland, Oregon. There's a major EMP, electromagnetic pulse, that takes out all of civilization, basically.
Mhm.
And it and the novel is the story of this group of people trying to survive that. Now, when I was younger, you're a writer, and when you go to schools, you get asked all the time, where do your ideas come from and what books influenced you and yada, yada, yada. What's your favorite color and where do you buy your clothes and what kind of car do you drive and all that stuff. And I always tell them I was heavily, heavily influenced. And maybe, I don't know if you were or not, but I was heavily influenced by the Heinleins, the Philip K. Dicks, the science fiction writers of the Cold War, who wrote a lot of that type of post-apocalyptic. I remember Robert Heinlein's Revolt in 2100
Mhm.
really well. Man in the High Castle, and all of these books were about humanity, trying to survive. And then the movies, if you remember the movies, there was the Omega Man and the Last Man on
Oh
Earth
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
Planet of the Apes, and all of these, like, in some ways subtly terrifying because I remember growing up in school and seeing the propaganda posters for the Russian army and like how many more tanks they had than we did and how many more, fighter. And we didn't know until years later that that was all a joke. I mean, they had
Mhm.
practically nothing, that would fly. And, but I grew up in some ways believing that Russian tanks might be coming down the main street of my small hometown at any moment. And for a kid with an imagination, that's a little scary, and
Yeah.
those books, I guess because I like to be scared, and I think I read them because I wanted to have ideas for when it happened for how to survive. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to know what the people in the books were doing. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting to me that that book Switch was uh and there'll be links for people to buy this at the end of the video. Um I wondered about that. I wondered how you got. I mean, I know you and I, we like mostly the same movies, the same stuff. And it was just interesting to me because that was such a big thing to me. And I wondered where it came from.
Where it came from.
I've never
What?
done post-apocalyptic fiction yet. I mean, I might, but you did. I mean, that book I love that book. I mean, it was like, okay, and it's in my little waterproof, nuclear-proof case of,
Oh, good.
things this is what you do when
Yeah, because there's lots of tips in it.
TNT happens, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I hear you. I don't know if here it is, by the way,
Yes.
Switch. Um, I don't know if it came so much from that, everybody's lost power
Mhm.
in their life. In fact, I lost it last week. We had a tornado hit here, actually three of them, and the power went out for, I don't know, 4 or 5 days, which is inconvenient. But what happens when the power doesn't come back ever? And that's kind of why I wrote it. I have this really love-hate relationship with technology.
Mhm.
Like I really like it too much. And when I like it too much, I kind of want to get rid of all of it. And so I think we're very dependent on technology. And that's actually why I wrote the book. So what happens when the power goes out? When the power goes out, of course, you and I wouldn't be here on Zoom.
Right.
We wouldn't be doing this, and ATM machines wouldn't work, and cash registers at stores wouldn't work, and credit cards wouldn't work. And what happens if all this technology suddenly doesn't exist and it doesn't come back? You
Right.
know what I mean? And cars stop working because they have electronics in it. And what and how would we do? I mean, the people that would do really well, I think, are homeless people because they're used to not having anything. You know what I mean? But us regular people who are kind of, really geared into this. I mean, I wrote you yesterday and said the internet's out
Right.
today because they were replacing a pole that got snapped off during the tornado. And so I'm always reminded of that. And I wrote that book because I wanted to get rid of technology and to see how people reacted to not having all this really cool stuff that we have. And it takes place in Oregon on my farm, and we have a farm, and we're lucky to have a farm. And if the power went out, we would probably be more okay than someone in an urban setting and so forth. And so I just kind of put that together because of my feelings for technology. Not that I'm a prepper, as I've always told people. I do have preppers in the family. They'd say things like, "Well, you're not storing food," and I go, "Well, I don't have to because you have it, and you wouldn't let me starve. You would feed me." So I'm definitely not a prepper, but I know a lot about it, and that's why I wrote the book. And it's a little bit autobiographical because it takes place on my farm in Oregon, a place I was at. I don't live there now, but I lived there for 30 years and wrote my books there and stuff. And Marie has some real quirky brothers and sisters, and I wanted to write about them. And they're still trying to figure out which one is which in the book. I hid that really well. And so that's really why I wrote the book. I mean, and if you get back down to writing, a lot of times, in fact, ideally, I actually unplug when I'm writing. I don't have anything plugged in. I mean, I'm not on the internet. My Apple Watch is not working, my iPhone is off, and I kind of try to step away from it. And I don't step away from it because I think it's bad. I step away from it because I think that I'm semi addicted to it, like most people. I think we're really dependent upon that stuff because it's really cool stuff. I mean, we're doing a Zoom, and that's part of technology, and that's great and stuff. But I find it mildly annoying. Not you, and not the Zoom, but I mean, just the whole concept of being, it's supposed to kind of help us save time, but I think it's kind of for me, it's a big distraction.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. It's great to have, you know, uh, doing books and doing research. I mean, all the
Yeah.
stuff we have available to us now is just so much. It's amazing, really.
It's better. It's better than it was
Better.
30 years
Yeah,
ago. That's for sure. Much better.
and when I was working on Rise of the Spider, I don't know if you've used the any of the AIs yet, but as a search tool, but I I put in this question to one of them and I said, tell me the breakdown of German, or tell me how German primary schools were structured in the 1930s. And I thought that's going to be something like, well, I don't really have a lot of information. And I got like 15 bullet points of how
Wow. Yeah.
it was up until this grade and it was called, this and this and this. And then they moved to this and this, subjects taught were blah, 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 blah. And I was like, and I was grateful, but also kind of,
Yeah. Kind of scared. I mean,
and,
it's
and,
a weird. It's a very weird thing.
and then when it started asking me about my banking information and where I kept my life insurance policies and those things, I thought I had to shut it down at that point. But
Yeah.
I so if we could talk about, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Rise of the Spider, which you have
Yeah,
read.
good. Which I've read, so go for it.
And,
Let me determine whether you have it down or not, since I read the book. So
it is interesting how when I was talking about like the Cold War and that influence and one of the reasons why that period of time and particularly the war has always fascinated me is that my dad was a veteran of the war, and my uncle died on Omaha Beach on June 6th, 1945. Obviously, I never got to know him, but it's like this puzzle that, as always, I keep digging up a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And so and the other thing I think was I grew up in a really small town, about 1,500 people, 60 people in my high school class, my senior class. But almost all the dads and the men my dad's age in that environment, they all were veterans, every single one of them, unless there were a couple that were medically, unable to do it. And so it was like this generational, I mean, it affected everybody. And all of those men were, scoutmasters and little league coaches and teachers, and they all had this impact on me that when you're a kid and you're a snotty teenager, you don't pay any attention to any of that crap. But I know now when I look back on it, I know that that's the reason for the fascination. I got to go to Bastogne where my dad was, and there's something about walking there, that it affects you. And so getting a chance to tell this story, which takes place before the war, and it's interesting how things morph because my original idea was to do a story on the Edelweiss Pirates, which were this group of kids during World War II, late in the war in Germany. They were German kids, and they started to see what was going on with the Nazis and that Germany was losing. And so they did everything. They engaged in espionage and tricks and propaganda and all this kind of stuff. And their symbol was this white Edelweiss that they would leave, at the scenes of. And we started talking about that with my editor, and it was like, we got into how this whole, which is interesting. The resistance in itself is interesting, but what else is interesting is how did it develop? and what happened to, I mean, where you had a country where people voted. Like I just saw something in Austria that like 90% of the people in Austria voted to join Germany after the Germans invaded. It was a 90% vote.
Yeah,
Wow, hey,
big surprise.
what a surprise. And so the origin of that was interesting to me. And so I don't know, I mean, these kids, by the time the war comes, they'll be old and be fighting in the war probably, but this initial resistance to this doctrine that they're being force fed was an interesting story to me. I don't, and
Well,
I
and
hope I,
you cover it really well in the book. I mean, the first, I don't know, 40 or 50 pages is basically the background about how that happened. And I think that's one of the great things about your book. Meaning, usually start your books with an explosion, but in this book, you actually started out writing about how this kind of went down, and I think that's a really great thing for kids to read if they can, because it's so kind of shocking how it kind of evolved and stuff. And I know a lot about it. I've been a World War II buff for most of my life. My parents, like your parents, were uh, veterans. My mom was actually a veteran too, and so my dad was a flight instructor, and my mom was in the wax and active. That's how they met, was during World War II. And so I've been fascinated for years and years and years. And I think that what happened, what you do in your book, and you do it really well, is that you kind of, we all talk about, yeah, yeah, we were at war with the Nazis, skipping decades of how that happened, how they came into
right.
power, and how that affected the population. And I thought you did that really well. And I hope that kids hang with that, because that is such an important part of the entire Nazi thing, and is how does that really happen? And there are really some interesting parallels to what's going on today. I'm not saying anything. I'm not going to get
No,
political with
no,
you,
I
but
know.
there's some very interesting things going, not just here in the United States,
No,
but in other countries as well. We're kind of very polarized, and I think that's what happened in Germany, and
and
they
I
were
think that,
starving.
I don't like talking about messages and books or anything like that. I just
Yeah,
tell a story, but if there is a message, I think it's on the danger of extremism, whether
yeah. Either way.
it comes from. How easy and insidious it is for it to take. Now, and it's amazing to me. In Bavaria is where where the Nazi Party started to,
Hmm.
beer hall putsch, and the reason that Hitler only served about 10 months of his 5-year sentence for treason for killing 4 Munich police officers is that all of the judges in his trial were Nazi Party members.
Hmm.
They wanted to acquit him, but they
Yeah.
realized they couldn't acquit him because these police officers had died, so he was gonna, and so then they let him out for good behavior. I mean, and then that when I read that, it made me think of my mom. When I was old enough to vote, we were talking about voting and your responsibilities and things like that. And she said, you have to pay attention to your local races and your local offices. The judge,
Yeah.
the judges, the commissioners, you have to pay attention to what they're doing because that's where it starts. And
Yeah.
and we say, well, we've got checks and balances and we've got this and we've got that. And not so much.
No, no. I mean, we're
Germany
kind of
at that point was a
a
constitutional republic. And
yeah.
so anyway,
We're in the United States is are a contentious republic. I mean, there's boom. I mean, there's some real problems, and there's too few moderates, and
yeah,
too few people kind of going down the road like me, and you're just kind of going, "This is ridiculous," and "This is ridiculous." We need to just sort of uh, be sensible and a little bit kinder, and it's very complicated, and it's
I just wish that
kind of horrendous, but
everybody would just step back, everybody on every side just step back and take a breath. Just for
yeah,
5 minutes, stop and just take a breath and
yeah,
realize we talk about how polarized we are. hello, we fought a civil war. We go read about the election of 1872 if you want to see a contentious election.
Mhm.
I mean, it's all past as prologue, and we
Mhm.
don't, and because we don't really study history effectively in this country, we think if something didn't happen within the last 10 years, it's never happened. This is
No. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
worst thing that's ever happened ever.
It's really true, So yeah, and I think it does change how your book actually does change kind of how we look at what's happening today. I think it's really relevant to today. I mean, and I'm not again saying Nazism is back or anything like that. I'm just saying that this is kind of how this stuff rolls and gains momentum as it's rolling, and sort of picks up things, and people just go basically out of their minds in dealing with this stuff. And again, I'm an old guy looking back on lots of things that I've seen and had personal experience with, but um, I I do think that was actually my favorite part. Even though there weren't explosions and bombs and you know people killing each other and stuff in the first part, I actually really liked that part quite a bit. And like I said, I hope you know kids kind of are able to embrace that the same way that I was able to embrace it.
I agree.
Because I'm a big World War II buff. In fact, yesterday was D-Day,
Correct. Yeah.
which is a big deal. You're just talking about, your uncle and all the people and so last night in honor of that, I watched The Longest Day, which is based on a book by Cornelius Ryan, which I read 50 years ago and loved the movie and stuff. And it was a really, it's kind of like the World War II is kind of like the big story when things were a lot clearer. Does that make sense?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty clear war, and
Uh-huh.
with things going on that we couldn't allow to go on, and we had to interfere and
Right.
eventually join up and eventually help out. But um, I think that that's one of the things that makes World War II resonate
Right.
is because it's relatively simple. Nazism rose up. The reason they rose up is because there was economic problems, and it's always about the money.
Right.
Basically, everything is about the money, and you know what I mean. And people were afraid and hateful, and that causes problem. And I think today we're afraid, and I think we're hateful. Depends on what side you are, one way or another.
Right.
And I think that really leads to huge, huge problems, which of course we're experiencing today. So I think it's totally relevant to what's going on today.
I think it survives and it has so much interest because I believe, and this is just my opinion, that World War II is the most transformative event in human history up to this point. And it was also, as you said, truly a global conflict. You're talking about
Yeah,
80 some countries that were involved in the war effort. And so all the things that came out of it that we still are living on today. I mean, it's quite remarkable, really. But it is something that I think like you mentioned, there's also I think the Studs Terkel book, The Good War. Uh,
yeah, I read it. Absolutely.
and I don't know if you remember when we were working on IQ and we were watching the 3 Days of the Condor, and John Houseman's character gets asked about being an old spy, an old spook,
Yeah.
and he goes,
Mm.
I've been doing this since before we had the sense to number our wars." And he said, "You missed," and this young guy said, "Did you miss that kind of action, sir?" He says, "I missed that kind of clarity." And
Yeah,
always, I've always remembered that line
yeah,
as a and I think that that's it. I think there's a lot of that is like we start looking at other conflicts and there's I don't know about that, I don't know about that, but back then it was like I think in most people's minds it was good versus evil, and that
Now it's very gray, Israeli and Hamas and the Palestinians.
Right.
The Ukraine, I think, is a little clearer cut kind
Right.
of a thing, but the question is, should we be involved? That's very similar to World War II. We didn't really get into World War II until like 4 years late. Basically, we weren't really ready to get into it, and um, you know, that was debated. World War II is
Oh, sure.
hotly debated in the United States. I mean, hotly debated. I mean, like we don't want in or we want to go in or whatever. And so that's an interesting story too. I mean, our reluctance to actually get involved
Right.
in that whole thing was,
Right.
to me, very fascinating. But the rise of Nazism, like you cover in your book, in the first book, is really, it's actually concise and great. And I really, because I wondered when you told me you were going to write this book, how you were going to, whether you were just going to jump in without anybody really, which is how most people know, they don't really have the idea of how that, they don't understand how that came to be
Right.
and how that rose up, how the spider, the
Sure.
spider came into the thing, which is actually a great title for the series too. I mean, I like everything about it. I mean, I'm eager for the book to come out, and I'm hopeful that people embrace it like I have.
Well, I think I appreciate that. So I guess I thought something fun to do would be to talk about uh, kind of our days as writers, because that's another common thing, like what does your day look like? And if you remember a speech I gave at the conference in Warrensburg once that heavily involved you, flying around the world and saving endangered species, before lunch was
Yeah, my day job before I became an author. Right when
right,
I as we say, I used to be famous until I became an author.
right, exactly, exactly. Um,
Yeah.
But so I thought I would see what was on your to-do list today and on my to-do list, and then we could
Yeah.
trade. Uh,
Good.
and
Well,
number one on my to-do list today is get a pedicure.
nice. I've never had one. I don't let anybody mess with my toes, so I mean,
I,
I'm not into that.
happy to trade me that one.
I've had offers, and they say, "Hey, you want to get?" I mean, no, no, never, never.
I'm at a point where because of my artificial hips, I can't bend over anymore. So
Oh, so you have to go and get them trimmed.
and yeah, I could
Well, I'm your good friend. I would take care. If I lived near you, I would trim your toenails for you,
oh well,
so
that's
you didn't
awesome.
have to go through the humiliation of getting a
Yeah, come
pedicure.
down to Bentonville every 2 months. It
Yeah,
wouldn't be,
I'll do
it
it.
would almost be cheaper, let me tell you.
I could just, you could just fly in. I can do it in the airport. And you could jump on the airplane and fly back. It'd be
Yeah,
easy.
yeah, but I have to go because I'm getting to the point where I could like glide over a lake and catch fish. Right.
Yeah, click, 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 click. Yeah, on the hardwood floor.
Right, right, right,
Well, I mean, back to I just I write every day. I show up in
right.
this little room. This is where I work, and it's been other rooms over the years, but this is the current room in Bentonville, Arkansas. And I get up and just try to finish books. I'm working on a couple things. I wrote a series called The Wilds, which came out last year. Actually, two books came out last year, and the third book is coming out this month in June. It's called Captivity. I don't know if they'll continue the series, but I'm kind of done with it now, waiting to hear if they want to go any further on it. And so, like last year, I had a really big year for me. Usually, I have one book come out a year if I'm lucky. Last year, The Switch came out, the two Wilds books, and this book is a nonfiction book about invasive species. And so, I'm kind of getting back into eco adventure fiction. That's where I started. I started writing nonfiction books about animals because I worked with animals for 20 years, and then I started writing novels about animals, eco adventure, and then I got away from that and wrote, like The Switch and mysteries and historical fiction. But now I'm back into eco adventure fiction, and that's kind of what I'm working on now. I do have a novel I'm working on called The Pickpocket. It takes place in Paris. It's a spy novel for kids. I wrote it, finished it, and didn't like it. And people who are watching this should know that sometimes you write a book and work really, really hard on it, and you just think it sucks. And I actually called the editor, and they said, "Is the book done?" And I said, "Yeah." They said, "Can we have it?" And I go, "Well, no, because it's no good." I mean, I said, "I just don't like it. I got to redo this thing." And one thing people watch is, I don't send a book in to be published unless I like it, because it's going to be out forever, and then I'd have to justify it. And it's like having a bad child. You don't want to talk about that kid. And so I'm kind of struggling to rewrite that book, and rewriting a book totally after you finished it is a really hard thing to do. Yeah, I mean, it's horrible. And so I'm working on that, and I'm working on an adult sort of spy novel that takes place here in Bentonville, which is kind of a more of a fun project. I don't know if it'll ever go anywhere. I don't really care, because I'm a little bit more interested in the books that I've actually been paid to write. That
For
the
sure.
money actually does make me kind of pay more attention to that, because I'm obligated to finish this book. And so I just wake up in the morning and I start writing. Generally, I unplug. I don't, plug into technology and sit here and write for several hours. And sometimes just like everybody, stare at a screen and not do much. Even, I mean, so I should mention this too, because it's not just you and me, and I feel this way. I think anybody can write a book. I mean, I don't think writers are born. I think they're made. And the reason I've been able to get like 50 plus books published is because I spent a lot of time doing it. I mean, most of my time basically revolves around me showing up here in this office and trying to tell a story in a good way. You know what I mean? And some days are good and some days are bad. Kids always say, "What do you get when you get writer's block?" And I say, "I don't really believe in writer's block." I mean, let's say you go to a doctor and you say, "I'm sick," and he goes, "I'm sorry, I can't help you because I have medical block." Or you go to a mechanic and say, "My car's broken." They go, "I can't help you. I have engine block." So I don't believe in being blocked, but having said that, I think I get blocked every day,
Right.
if that makes sense. I'm sure you do too. Most authors do, where it's not like reading a book where everything's nice and smooth. It's like,
Some days you get the words down fast enough, and some days it's like a struggle to get two sentences. I mean,
most days are like that for me. I mean, I honestly, eventually I get through it, but the reason I get through it is because I show up.
right.
And I think that's the real trick about being a successful writer. You, regardless of your success or failures, which of course we all have, lots of them, uh, you show up. You know what I mean? You have a bad day, you show up the next day and hope for a better day, and
Finish it.
tomorrow's always better.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I do. A lot of times, to keep me unplugged, I write by hand. I mean, manually, I write in a little notebook, or I actually use a manual typewriter, because it keeps me off all the gizmos, which I'm addicted to, like everybody else is. You know what I mean? I want to check my email and see if I got any really good news, and I want to go to social media and see if anybody's talking about me, and all those things that happen. I'm so kind of geared into that. I tend to work unplugged. I mean, I don't have a phone on. I don't have any of this stuff on, because it helps me stay focused on what I'm doing, which is working on a story.
Right. Well, listen, we got about 2 minutes left, so I just wanted to say thanks for being here. And you can be found at rolandsmith.com, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
As long as there's no EMP and the internet is working.
Yeah, you never know. It went out yesterday. The tornadoes took out the internet. What about your writing process? Do we have time for that?
Yeah,
A couple minutes?
mine is it goes like this. I start a book, and then when people will start asking me, "How's the book going?" And I'll say, "Fine." And then they'll, "How's the book going?" And I say, "Oh, it's going fine." Yeah. And then like a month later, oh, how's the book going? It's going fine. And then it's like, oh, how a month later after that, how's it going? Stop hounding me.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, fine is a real broad term. I mean, fine means I'm working on
right.
it.
That's like, I can't remember who it was that taught me that very early in my writing career was the answer is always, it's fine. So,
Yeah, yeah,
but
it's fine.
I do, I have a really, like I said, it's some days that you can't get the words down fast enough, and other days you sit there and you stare at the cursor like, you know, come on, buddy, come on. And but you're right, it's butt in the chair and showing up. That's the
Yeah, you show up, and I think I have more bad days than good days, but I think people should take that as encouragement,
right.
meaning that that's just the way it works. I mean, that's just what it is.
Yeah.
You
All right,
know,
well,
for
thanks,
me
Paul.
anyway. Great talking to you, friend.
And we will
How'd you get that little bubble up there? I don't get no bubble up there.
all right.
Wow. Now I'll have to spend 20 minutes trying to figure out how to do that online. That'll distract me.